Okay, so you've decided to become a member of an internationally renowned institution dedicated to pushing the boundaries of human consciousness. Most likely, you're going to need a team of people in a gleaming office building with a flashy brand name to help you do it, yeah? A+ education, Ivy ABC, EDU up. These guys sound like a bunch of scholars who know what they're doing, right? Okay, so university applications are definitely designed to be something that one person can do by themselves, but let's face it, you're about to spend $250,000 on education. You wouldn't buy anything else that expensive without some kind of consultation, so why should this be any different? It would almost be foolish not to spend a few extra $1,000 to ensure that the process is handled with some level of expertise. But having said that, some agencies are more capable than others, and in fact many are less capable than the high-performing high school students they serve. During my 10 years working and studying in China, I've been involved with all sorts of admissions agencies, test prep centres and other education firms, and I'd like to share some of my experience of how they operate so that you can choose the better ones and make sure that they help you as much as possible. So what can agents do to help you out, and what should you watch out for? Choosing schools. Alright, between the US, UK and Canada, there are dozens of internationally recognised strong research universities. Which one is right for you? It's a hard question, and one that agencies could help you answer. On the other hand, at the first agency I worked for, I soon discovered that they'd come up with almost exactly the same school list for every student. Basically all the schools ranked 20 to 50 in the US News rankings, excluding some in undesirable locations. To tell the truth, that's actually not really a bad strategy for most students. US top 20 schools are mostly only accessible to students from well-known high schools that send several students each year, and those schools' admissions counsellors have their own processes for sorting their top students between the elite schools, in some cases specifically directing students to ED a certain school. If you're from a high school like that, you'll already know that, and your college counsellor can help you choose your school. But if you're a clever student applying from outside those channels, then you really don't need to worry about fit quite so much, and all you really can and should do is try your luck with most of the competitive but non-elite schools ranked 20 to 50, with some regard to their strength in your target major, and go to the best one that you get into. Conclusion, agencies can provide some insight into school choice, but typically not very much more than what I just said here. Watch out for agencies pushing students into large universities ranked 40 and below. Guess what? Purdue is the best school in America, and you look like just the Boilermaker type. Okay, so Purdue is a great school, but I once interviewed to work with a well-known Shanghai agency whose primary concern with me as an essay teacher was to make sure that I would persuade students not to apply to schools with difficult essays and talk them down towards easier schools. Of course, as an essay teacher, my feeling was that if a student wanted to tackle the University of Chicago essays, then that would just make my job more interesting. But from the agency's perspective, they would have had to pay me to do that, so their strategy was to take students who could have gotten to top 30 schools with some luck and a lot of effort on the essays, and convince them instead to apply to the same set of large universities with high admissions rates and easy essay requirements. Incidentally, the interview didn't work out, as it turned out that the job description of essay teacher was to spend all of my time convincing students not to write essays. Limiting the number of schools you can apply for. One of the ways that agencies prevent you from applying to reach schools is by limiting the number of schools you can apply for, or charging you per application, which encourages you to add more safety schools and makes selecting schools more difficult and important than it really needs to be. The truth is, each application is easier than the last, and once you've developed the essays, activity lists, and talking points that you need to apply to 10 schools, applying to another 10 takes very little extra effort. If your priority is your students' success, there's really no good reason to stop them from applying their newly learned admissions skills to as many universities as possible, because you never really know which of those schools might be looking for a student just like them. Personally, I always try to have my students apply to as many schools as they can, because that way they get into more schools. Fake relationships with universities. One of the first agencies I worked for was led by an alumnus who claimed to be the former admissions officer at an elite American university. Looking back on it, I'm almost certain he actually wasn't, but in any case, he let the parents believe that he had relationships with elite American admissions officers, and that's definitely not true. Elite American universities have nothing to gain from maintaining relationships with Chinese agencies. They already have a verified, steady stream of paying students coming from posh American high schools, and no one is sitting at an admissions office giving special consideration to an application from third-tier China because they think it might have been sent along by some former junior colleague. Filling in forms. Perhaps you don't know exactly where to submit your application, what information you have to fill in, and when it's due. Incidentally, the one-word answer is commonapp.org, but perhaps having someone else fill out the forms will save you some time? Well, since the forms just require your personal information, most agencies will have you fill out their own form, which is essentially a Chinese language version of the Common App, and then they paste your answers into the Common App itself. The staff responsible for this task will usually spend a lot of time sending personal reminders to make sure you submit information before the deadlines. In fact, when it comes down to it, that's their real job, to continuously keep in touch and chat with the mothers about deadlines and test scores and reassure them that their kids are doing alright compared to all the other kids. Considering that this is one of the core services that agencies provide, it's also eminently the most useless. I understand that there's a therapeutic element to the service, but filling in the application form directly is just more efficient and more accurate than interacting with staff whose job it is to fill in the form for you. My students usually prefer to fill in the Common App themselves, and if they have any questions about what a question means, they can always ask me, or the internet, and at the end they can make a printout of the application and send it to me to make sure everything's in order. Filling in forms is a task that can be done either correctly or incorrectly, so there's not much space for expertise. But there is room for error, so watch out for incorrectly filled out forms. If you have an agency fill in your forms for you, make sure that you can also access your account and double check it for errors and misspellings. Agencies typically put their more literate staff in charge of essay writing, and assign form filling duties to people whose English is not quite as good as the students. Back in my days working in agencies, one of the biggest headaches was having to deal with student questions about whether or not the form fillers had made an error, and then communicating the corrections back to the students so that they could communicate the corrections back to the form fillers. In the end, I would have preferred to just check the forms and talk to the parents myself, and so now that's what I do. Fake activities. If you don't fill in every space of your activity and awards lists, agencies might get nervous and impulsively start making stuff up without asking you. I remember one night before the deadline, I was alone with some students in the office, and one of them discovered that their activity list had been supplemented by one of the Chinese teachers and had become full of meaningless, confusing, and inconsistent information. I had to go through all of my students' activities, and we found all sorts of nuggets like China Poetry Champion for a science student who had indicated no interest in poetry anywhere else in the application, as well as Pottery Leader, Obedient Boy Award, and #1 Math in China for a student who had studied a social science curriculum. One student went from being a member in 4 clubs and a founder of 1 to CEO in all 5. Beyond that, every 3rd place in a provincial competition here and every 2nd place in a school competition there became 1st place in a national level competition every single time. Essentially, they'd taken what was an impressive set of real achievements and converted them into outright and obvious fabrications. So make sure to get a printout of the application before submission and make sure that it's true, because if it's not, you won't be fooling anyone. Essays. So here's one area of college admissions where I think there's quite a lot of space for legitimate help. By that, I mean that Chinese students have no experience with this sort of writing, so their first attempts are almost always useless or self-destructive. But with some guidance and correction, they definitely can learn to produce authentic, decent personal writing by themselves. However, teaching students how to write is also the most difficult and time-consuming thing for agencies to do, and it's typically the part of the admissions process that is the most beyond a manager's expertise and has to be contracted to more temporary workers lower down the company hierarchy. That's where we run into trouble, because the managers may very well not be able to tell the difference between a good and a bad essay teacher, and in any case they have little insight as to how to manage them. The point is, you'll have to form your own judgment as to whether or not an agency has good essay teachers by speaking to them yourself, and you should also make sure that they will be able to work with you directly to help you bring out your own ideas and insights. Watch out for secret essay ghostwriters. In the early days of admissions in China, companies would hire whole teams of American university grads to help students write and edit essays, but these essays now have the work done by local university English majors while still pretending to have American university grads on their staff. I'm fairly sure that I'm listed as a teacher at several agencies in China, and for the record, I'm not. Just because you have spoken with an essay teacher at an agency doesn't mean that these people work for that agency, even if they seem to think they work for that agency. I was once hired to give a talk on admissions for a few hundred people, with the understanding that I would help consult with their students in the future. The agency hosting the event introduced me to parents and students as their own exclusive essay teacher, but after the event they hired a local university student to ghostwrite the essays instead, and just told the parents that I'd done it. Also, be careful to make sure that your essay teacher has the background the agency says they do. I once had a boss who would just tell parents whatever he thought they wanted to hear about me. Once at an admissions seminar, a mother said that her son was interested in studying physics, and the boss immediately pointed to me and said, "Our essay teacher here has a PhD in physics from Harvard." And I'm sure I grimaced, but I couldn't immediately deny it without making my boss lose face in front of hundreds of people. I also know of another operation in Shanghai that has a team of editors who are required to assume the identity of the founder and manager in all their correspondence. All of those essay teachers were actually very qualified and clever people, but the manager could charge twice as much for his personal services as compared to theirs, so that's what he did. Cultural misjudgments. When you have people writing things on your behalf, you should be very careful that the managers of the agency have enough American cultural awareness to avoid accidentally adding harmful content to your application. I once had a very bright student with a strong interest in hard sciences, and she wanted a recommendation from her chemistry teacher. The teacher couldn't write a recommendation letter though, and asked the student to do it herself, so one of the Chinese teachers at the agency did it. Eventually the student had some doubts and had me take a look at the letter, and it was essentially a word salad of sexism, beginning with compliments on her appearance, her dress, and ending by saying that the student speaks softly and not too much, behaving the way a woman should. She would certainly bring your great institution a fresh and comfortable feeling. I thought, gosh, this girl wants to study chemistry at a top 10 university, and she's conquering math competitions around the country, but if all her 50-year-old chemistry teacher can say is how comfortable her dresses make him feel, not only do we have a major distraction, but it also casts doubt on the quality of her high school and makes you wonder whether she could have possibly learned anything useful there in the first place. So I deleted most of the creepy stuff and added a couple of lines about how she'd founded a theoretical physics club, which was true. As it turned out, the boss of the agency saw the new letter and was furious that I had deleted such kind words about this girl's soft, appropriate feminine behaviour and added boring information about physics that no one cared about. The situation escalated and I had to talk to the whole family of that student to encourage them not to use the agency's letter. Email-based editing. If you can find an agency that will assign you an essay teacher to help you learn to write, make sure that you can communicate in person or at least over voice call. No matter how talented the essay teacher is, the factor holding back students' essays is not a lack of professional editing, it's that the students don't provide enough personal details and insight in the first place. When I started working for agencies, the concept was that students would email me an essay and I would fix it up and make it pretty and send it back to them within 3 days. The result was that I would go crazy looking at jumbles of words saying apparently irrelevant and self-destructive things, written in a tone of either arrogant contempt or self-hatred. I remember one harrowing essay in particular from one of my students about how his grandpa would beat him with a hammer when he made a mistake as a child, and even today, whenever he starts to feel self-indulgent, bam, down comes the hammer. Whenever he starts to feel proud of a good grade, bam, down comes the hammer. I think the point was that he thought it was important not to get too carried away, but I remember thinking to myself, what am I supposed to do, fix the grammar? Anyway, eventually I discovered that the best approach is to read students' essays while they're there, so that my reactions can be useful to them, and so that I can ask more questions about the bits I didn't understand, immediately identify certain sentences that were well done, and insert quick notes where I want more explanations or more examples or more analysis. Now I do almost all of my consulting by appointment, over voice call and collaborative editing with software like Shimo or Google Docs, so I can point to exactly what I'm talking about while talking to the student. Also, I find that when we have appointments, it motivates students to prepare something beforehand, and they appreciate not having to wait for the feedback. So when you're working with an agency, I would check to make sure that they will support this method of collaboration as well. Conclusions. To take an extreme view, if you look at how education agencies' budgets are dominated by marketing costs, they're essentially customer acquisition companies. Their assets are their contacts, their brand, and their marketing expertise. But the core of what they sell, which is to say filling in application forms with relevant, true, and helpful information, is actually contracted out to more temporary workers, with varying degrees of success. There are many talented and earnest teachers, both Chinese and foreign, working for agencies, but you should be careful to check their qualifications and abilities, and to make sure that they will be available to help you one-on-one. Thanks for watching, subscribing, sharing, and all of the other proprieties associated with online media consumption. I'll be continuing to make videos guiding you through the admissions process all year, so check back soon. But until then, check out my website at cliveparkinson.com and take my new automatic consulting appointment system for a spin. You can now schedule and pay for an appointment without even having to talk to me. That's right, the future is now. And until next time, eat more vegetables and be nice to your mother.